What if everything you were taught about cavemen was wrong? Not just exaggerated, not just outdated, but fundamentally wrong. The image we all grew up with, a slouching brute, grunting in a loincloth, swinging a club, too dumb to survive, that wasn't history. It was fiction. He wasn't a failure of evolution. He was a parallel success story, cut short. This is the story of how bad science, Victorian arrogance, and Hollywood fantasy buried one of the most advanced beings of the Ice Age beneath a mountain of myth. And now, it's time to dig him out. Not as a monster, not as a mockery, but as who he truly was. Welcome to Prehistoric Shadows. Let's reintroduce ourselves to the cousin we tried to forget. It started in 1856, a quiet limestone quarry tucked in Germany's Neanderthal Valley. There, a group of workers unearthed something strange. Bones thick as tree trunks, a skull low and sloped, a spine that curved like a question mark. To the Victorian scientists of the time, the conclusion seemed obvious. A primitive brute, half man, half beast, a perfect missing link. But here's the truth. That skeleton belonged to an elderly Neanderthal, not some beast, not a half-formed ancestor. Just an old man with arthritis. His stooped posture, not a sign of savagery. A simple medical condition, one any of us might face if we're lucky enough to grow old. And yet, that image stuck. The hunched caveman, hairy, grunting, barely human. He crawled into our textbooks, leered from children's cartoons, stared blankly from museum glass. The club, the slouch, the savage. We painted him that way because it made us feel superior, more evolved, more chosen. But what if he hadn't been hunched? What if he had stood tall? What if we had looked at those bones and seen a fellow human staring back? Instead, from one misread skeleton, we built a myth. And that myth would bury a species, not under snow or time, but under story, a shadow cast not by truth, but by pride. We picture them short, stumpy, slow. But Neanderthals were nothing of the sort. They were dense, not in mind, but in muscle. Their bones weren't just thick, they were engineered, forged by nature under the pressure of cold, wind, and time. A Neanderthal wasn't short. He was compact like a human tank. His frame? Built to carry, to lift, to endure. Massive rib cage, reinforced joints, a skeleton not sculpted for beauty, but for survival. They didn't need protein powder, didn't train in gyms, didn't pose for cameras. They hunted, hauled, endured. A single Neanderthal could lift a reindeer leg and walk for miles, through snowdrifts, against wind, under ice-gray skies. Because when winter stretched for generations, you didn't survive with speed. You survived with strength, real strength. Their bodies told a story we stopped listening to. Not a story of fashion, but of function. Not a body made to impress, but a body made to last. You and I, we sit behind desks, We scroll. We soften. But they were built by necessity, sculpted by danger, perfected by suffering. And that perfection we laughed off as primitive. They called him slow, a half-wit, a dead end on the evolutionary road. But the numbers say otherwise. The average Neanderthal brain was just as big as ours, sometimes bigger. And size wasn't the only thing that mattered. It was how they used it. For decades, we told ourselves a comforting lie that we were the thinkers, the dreamers, the only humans who could shape the world around us. But Neanderthals shaped theirs too. They made tools, not just rocks to smash, but instruments designed with precision, purpose, and planning. They controlled fire, built shelters, adapted their lives to seasons, to prey, to the ice. And deep in the caves of Europe, they left behind something else, something unmistakably human: art. Simple lines, red ochre dots, handprints pressed in silence, not random, not accidental, intentional, emotional, symbolic. They didn't just survive. They understood, they remembered, they felt. And yet, we still tell stories of the grunting brute, the one who couldn't speak, couldn't think, couldn't dream. Maybe it's not that Neanderthals lacked intelligence. Maybe it's that we lacked humility. Because to admit they were like us is to admit we're not as special as we thought. And that, for some, is harder to face than the Ice Age itself. They say we were the inventors, the thinkers, the strategists. But the Neanderthals, they had their own genius. Buried in the ice and the stone lies proof. Their toolkit. It wasn't primitive. It was precise. Archaeologists call it the Mousterian tradition, named after a cave in France. But don't be fooled by the name. This wasn't just sharp rocks. This was engineering. Scrapers for hide, points for hunting, flakes shaped like modern scalpels. Every edge had a purpose. Every strike of stone planned. These weren't last-minute tools made in panic. They were premeditated, intentional, refined over generations. And it wasn't just tools. It was tactics. They didn't chase prey blindly. They worked together. They drove animals into ravines, used wind, terrain, fear. Imagine a group of Neanderthals positioned along a cliffside, each one with a role, each one with a job, silent, ready, coordinated. That's not instinct, that's strategy. And there's more. Pollen samples found in Neanderthal burial sites suggest something remarkable. They may have used medicinal herbs, pain relief, inflammation, infection, not just survival, healing. So no, they weren't stumbling through darkness. They were adapting. They were calculating. They were thinking ahead. And while the Ice Age roared around them, they didn't just endure it, they beat it. They lived in a world of cold, ice, hunger, wind that never stopped. And yet, there was warmth, not from fire, from each other. Neanderthals weren't loners. They moved in small groups, tight, loyal, like family. And they acted like family too. Archaeologists have found skeletons of the old, the injured, the disabled, people who should not have survived. But they did, Because someone fed them, protected them, waited for them to heal. That's not instinct. That's care. And when a Neanderthal died, they didn't just leave the body. They buried it, sometimes in shallow pits, sometimes with flowers, tools, red ochre, a sacred color, even today. Why bury the dead? Why offer gifts? It wasn't for survival. It was for meaning. They remembered. They mourned. They might have told stories around the fire, of those who had gone, of those who had mattered. This was more than survival. It was society. It was spirit. And perhaps it was the first glimpse of what we now call soul. So when we picture them, let's not see animals in caves. Let's see people holding hands, carrying burdens, saying goodbye. Even in a world ruled by ice, Neanderthals made room for warmth. Picture a cave, dark, silent, still. Then, a flicker of torchlight, and a hand pressing pigment to stone. This wasn't Homo sapiens. This was Neanderthal. Over 60,000 years ago, long before our ancestors arrived, Neanderthals were already painting red ochre stains, simple dots, handprints left behind like signatures. On cave walls, stalactites, stone that hadn't felt sunlight in a million years. Why? Not to hunt, not to eat, but to express. This wasn't instinct. It was intention, emotion, memory. Some symbols repeat. Circles, lines, marks that meant something, even if we no longer know what. This wasn't the scribble of a beast. It was the whisper of a mind reaching out. Imagine them by firelight, surrounded by shadows, faces lit orange by flame, telling stories without words. Through color, through form, we once thought art began with us, that we were the first to dream, to imagine, to leave something behind. We were wrong. The first spark of creativity, the first message across time, may have come from Neanderthals. Not the brute with a club, but the artist in the dark. And in those handprints, maybe what we're really seeing is the first time someone looked at nothing and saw something more. In 2010, everything changed. Scientists decoded the Neanderthal genome, and the results shook the world. It turned out we didn't replace them. We merged with them. Today, almost every non-African human alive carries fragments of Neanderthal DNA in your skin, in your blood, in your bones. Not just history, not just theory, but biology. Your immune system, shaped in part by them. How your body handles fat, how you respond to altitude, how you fight off disease, all bear their fingerprints. They're not gone. They're in our cells, in our silence, in our sleep. When we thought they vanished, they were already living on, inside us. This isn't metaphor, it's science. Cold, hard, genetic fact. Some of us have more than 2%, others closer to 4%. But that's enough. Enough to know the story didn't end. It simply changed shape. They weren't a separate chapter. They were a sentence in our paragraph. a thread in our tapestry. And now, when you look in the mirror, really look, what you see isn't just Homo sapiens. It's something older, something colder, something carved by ice and time. Neanderthal, alive, not in museums, not in myths, but in you. For decades, we searched for the cause. We asked the same question: why did they disappear? Theories multiplied. Climate change, competition for food, viruses we carried but they couldn't fight. Each one brutal, each one final. But what if the truth was quieter? What if it wasn't conquest, but connection? Because the evidence tells a different story. They didn't vanish in war. They vanished in us. Cross-species mating, shared fire, shared shelter, shared blood. Over time, the line between Neanderthal and Homo sapiens blurred until it no longer mattered. And in the genetic code of modern humans, their legacy continued, not defeated, embraced, not erased, blended. Imagine it, two worlds colliding, not in violence, but in something gentler. Maybe the last Neanderthal didn't fall in battle. Maybe he held the hand of a woman from another kind. Maybe they raised children who would carry forward both names, both spirits. And we are their echoes. That's not extinction. That's transformation. That's not the end of a people. It's the start of a deeper humanity. One not built on walls, but bridges. We still see them as dumb, ugly, grunting shadows in the cave. Why? Because it served a purpose. Science, like history, is often written not by the most accurate, but by the most powerful. And Homo sapiens, we needed a story, a simple one, a flattering one. In the early 20th century, the world was obsessed with finding a missing link, that perfect halfway creature between ape and man, a bridge to prove our greatness. And Neanderthals, they were convenient, close enough to resemble us, but distant enough to reject. So we twisted the image, hunched the spine, exaggerated the brow, put a club in his hand and a grunt in his mouth. We made him less so we could feel like more. That wasn't science. That was ego. We wanted the past to look primitive so that the present could feel like progress. But the truth? It was never that simple. They were intelligent. They were strong. They were emotional. But admitting that would make us question everything we believed about our place on this earth. So we buried the truth right next to their bones. And in its place, we built a myth, a lie with a sloped forehead and a shameful legacy. They didn't build cities. They didn't write books. They didn't leave behind cathedrals or empires. But maybe they didn't need to. The Neanderthals lasted for over 350,000 years, longer than we've existed, longer than any civilization, longer than most of our species will ever remember. And that alone should make us pause. Because strength doesn't always mean conquest. Sometimes it means endurance. They weren't trying to dominate the planet. They were trying to live with it. They didn't measure success in monuments. They measured it in survival, in family, in firelight, in footsteps pressed into frozen ground. They cared for the weak, buried the dead, passed on skills, left behind marks, not of power, but of presence. They remind us that intelligence isn't just about invention. It's about adaptation, about resilience, about knowing when to fight and when to wait out the storm. Maybe they weren't a failure. Maybe they were something we lost. A version of humanity that knew how to endure, how to cooperate, how to belong. Not Homo sapiens, but still human, in the quiet ways that matter most. Go ahead. Look in the mirror. Take a good, honest look. That broad nose, that heavy brow, the way your body handles cold better than others, even that loud snore you've been told about for years. You might be seeing more than just genetics. You might be seeing your Neanderthal self, because they're not just bones in museums. They're not ancient ghosts. They're not them. They are us, carved into our DNA, woven into our bloodlines, living quietly in our reflexes, our resistance, our reactions we don't fully understand. We didn't leave them behind. We carried them forward. They walk with us, not in stories, but in bodies. And maybe that changes everything, because if the caveman never left, then the story never ended. Maybe that strength in your shoulders, that quiet resilience, that ability to endure through pain and cold and silence, maybe that isn't just you. Maybe it's a whisper from 40,000 years ago, a voice that says, I was here, and I am still here. They are not other. They are kin. And maybe, just maybe, they were better than the myths we buried them with. We've told the wrong story. For far too long, we mocked them, caricatured them, reduced them to punchlines and Halloween costumes. But now, we know better. And when you know better, you do better. It's time to rewrite the story. Not to flatter, not to romanticize, but to finally tell the truth. They weren't monsters. They weren't failures. They were human, just a different kind. They faced the cold, the dark, the long march of extinction. And through it all, they left behind memory, tools, fire, symbols, blood, us. We carry them in every cell, in every breath of winter air, in every moment we choose to endure instead of run. That deserves more than laughter. It deserves remembrance. So the next time you hear the word caveman, pause and remember what they really were. Not beasts in the dark, but brothers in the ice. And if there's any justice in history, let it begin here. Let us speak their name with respect. Let us tell their story with truth. Because they didn't get to write the ending. But maybe we still can. At Prehistoric Shadows, we don't chase headlines. We chase what was lost. We're not here to retell old myths. We're here to challenge them, to question what we thought we knew, to restore what was erased, not by time, but by arrogance. We believe that history isn't just dates and ruins. It's voices, silenced, buried, waiting. The Neanderthal was not a beast. He was not our failure. He was our brother. He lived. He loved. He mattered. And this time, we tell his story right. Because in every shadow cast by history, there's light worth uncovering. If this story challenged you, surprised you, changed you, don't let it end here. Subscribe to Prehistoric Shadows, because history isn't carved in stone. Sometimes it's buried in bone and waiting to be heard.